morning. Today's lecture will be the first one that will deal with a specific chemical reaction. We'll discuss chlorination of alkanes. Now, when we spoke about alkanes, we mentioned that they're not very reactive compounds, and the chlorination is one of the rare reactions they engage in. And we will discuss chlorination in quite a bit of detail because this is the first time we're talking about the reaction, so we'll go over a lot of elementary concepts that apply not only to chlorination, but to any reaction. And so if you look at the chemical reaction in general, where we take A and convert it into B, this represents the overall result of the reaction, but oftentimes a reaction is a much more complex thing, where going from A, we reach some species B, which is unstable, and then go to some other species C, which is also unstable, which finally gives us D, which is our product. And this description of a reaction is more complex and more detailed, and it's called mechanism. So the mechanism will be the full description of reaction pathway. And mechanisms are very important because they allow us to, since we understand the reaction in such depth, that they allow us to modify reaction conditions to maximize our output. And so they're very important both in academic world when we talk about chemistry, but it's also a very important field in industry because industry seeks to maximize the product, to maximize the yield of their products, and studying the mechanism actually helps them do that. Now, species B and C in this mechanism would be unstable species which are on the way between A and B, and they're called intermediates. So they're stable, but much less stable than A and B, and so they don't stick around for a very long time. Now, if you look at the first reaction, chlorination of methane, this reaction takes methane and chlorine, and after exposing them to light, and this can be visible light, we get chloromethane, and hydrogen chloride, HCl. If there is more chlorine available, then chloromethane will keep reacting, and so with more chlorine and more light, it will give us in the center is carbon. It will give us dichloromethane, also known as methylene chloride, which will then go on to react and give trichloromethane, also known as chloroform, very common solvent. And then finally, with even more chlorine, we will get the tetrachloromethane, or carbon tetrachloride, which is also a very common solvent. Now, how does this work on an atomic level? That's the question we're going to answer today. And to study, to answer these questions, we study things like mechanism, which is a step-by-step description of what happens in a reaction. Which bonds break, which bonds form, what happens first, what happens second, what happens simultaneously. The second broad field that is involved in complete explanation of a reaction is thermodynamics. And thermodynamics is probably a concept you encountered so far, but it's basically an energy balance sheet which tells us how do we need to invest energy, do we need to, is the energy released in the reaction, which product is the more stable than the other, and so forth. And finally, the third broad field that is involved in the full description of reactions is kinetics, chemical kinetics, which deals with the rate of reaction, which product is formed first, what forms the fastest, what forms the slowest. And neither of these three topics gives us a complete answer. It's really their interplay, which is often very, very complex, that allows us to explain what exactly is going on. And looking at the mechanism, which is the first thing we'll cover, of chlorination, we see three main observations which are kind of telling. The first one is that there is no chlorination without light. Which means that light is needed to initiate the reaction and make it go. Okay. The second chlorination, which is obtained from UV spectroscopy, is that chlorine absorbs light, not methane. This is an important observation, which means that the chlorine is the one which kickstarts the reaction, and methane comes in later. And so we'll see in our mechanistic description how does this really happen. And then the final observation is that a little light gives a lot of product. Which basically means that very little light somehow gets amplified to give a lot of product. This is typically an indication that we're having a chain reaction, where we initiate the reaction by adding this initial amount of light, and then reaction self-propagates until it runs out of starting material. Now we'll see how these three combine in our next topic, which actually delves deeper into the mechanism of radical chlorination.